Statehood for Alaska has meant a great deal to me in many ways. The right to vote for president, the right of representation in Congress, which will solve a great many of the inequalities which existed before Alaska achieved statehood.
It seems to me that there isn't enough people up here to pay the cost of statehood. To me, it's meant a lot more in taxes and other expenses that I don't think we're ready for at this time.
That cluster of houses you see behind me, clinging to the base of mist-topped mountains, is Juneau, capital of Alaska. Beside the city, what was once the largest gold mining operation in the world, its tunnels now silent and deserted. But in this little city lies the political control of a land 1/5 as big as the older 48 states. The whole northwest corner of our continent. Juneau is in the southern panhandle section of Alaska, where all towns are on the sea. The chief way of reaching Juneau is by plane. There are boats, but the aircraft is the only manner of spanning the incredible distances between Alaska's population centers quickly. For a capital, Juneau suffers under one difficulty: weather. Juneau people will prove, to their own satisfaction, that their weather is just as good as anywhere else in the new state. But you're lucky to be able to fly into the airport during 100 days out of the year, all of which seems to some to make the area inconvenient for a state capital. Temperatures are mild here, but dampness and fog are the usual order of the day. The harbor is picturesque. Fishing boats, tugs, and small craft churn through waters that are overshadowed by the mountains that come right down to the sea, with only a small shelf of flatland at the edge for travel and habitation. Even large buildings cling to the mountainsides. Can Alaska exist as a state? That was the question in my mind. Something over 100,000 civilians scattered in little clumps over an area 1/5 as large as the whole first 48 states. Little industry, less agriculture, hundreds of thousands of miles of wild and beautiful scenery. I came to Juneau, a little capital of 6,000 in town, perhaps 10 or 11,000 in the whole area, where almost everyone works for federal or state government. Town revolving around the State House and the Red Dog Saloon, where when you are bored, you go fishing, and nearly everyone in Juneau goes fishing often. A capital with no railroad, only one dead-end road. On one of the little streets, we stopped people at random and asked them what they thought of statehood for Alaska. Mrs. Field, what has statehood for Alaska meant for you personally?
Well, I feel that we are first-class citizens, like the rest of the nation. And Alaska is a wonderful country, and we think it's wonderful to be a citizen.
Statehood has made no change in my pattern of life, nor have I seen any change in the pattern of life since we have become a state.
Yes, Alaska means a great deal to me, and statehood has meant a great deal more. For the first time in my life, since I've lived here in this country, I've had the privileges of a full-fledged citizenship. This year, I will be able to vote for the President of the United States for the first time in my life. We feel that we now have representation as well as taxation.
Statehood to us has meant that we've changed our way of living. We lived in Seattle, and my husband works for a machine corporation, office machines, and because of statehood, we were sent here to live.
Statehood for Alaska has meant a great deal to me in many ways. The right to vote for president, the right of representation in Congress, which will solve a great many of the inequalities which existed before Alaska achieved statehood.
seems to me that there isn't enough people up here to pay the cost of statehood. To me, it's meant a lot more in taxes and other expenses that I don't think we're ready for at this time.
Judge James Wickersham was the man who first introduced a bill for Alaska's statehood back in March 1916. His relative, Mrs. Ruth Allman, has the judge's rich historical records and a facsimile of the $7,200,000 check with which we bought Alaska from Russia. Juneau's paper is the Alaska Daily Empire. Joe Kirkbride is the editor, and the editor of the paper, like the Empire, must be a jack of all trades to get the paper out. Joe is a thoughtful, knowledgeable newsman who has an intimate acquaintance with the new state's problems.
It seems, I guess, our biggest concern is a matter of finances, where we're going to be next year and the year after. We've found that our transitional grants we received when we became a state are going to expire in 1962. And at that time, if the cost of operating the state remains the same and the income from our taxes remain the same, we're going to be about $10 million short.
Well, that seems like quite a lot, judging by the fact that your total budget is how much?
$40 million a year.
So $10 million is a good sizable amount.
Yes, to a state of this size and our relatively small population, it is. But I think if I put everything in a basis of a big if, that we have probably the solutions if things go along as we think and believe and hope they will.
What solutions do you see?
Well, I think probably most people that have read of all the oil exploration that's going on in Alaska, almost all the major companies are up here, and we are confident that they're going to bring in producing wells. And of course, timber is a tremendous potential resource in Alaska. We have millions of board feet of timber, and at the present moment we have 2 big pulp mills in operation, and a third is scheduled to begin operations right outside of town.
Were there sizable investments in these mills?
Well, each one would be about a $60 million investment. And another big if, I think, concerns our fishery. At one time, Alaska was the #1 producer of salmon, but our resource has been overfished and depleted to the point to, well, I can give you as an example, in 1936, we had an annual pack of salmon of 8 million cases. Now, last year, it was the lowest pack in history. It was 1,600,000 cases. And just the fact that over the years, the fishery has been abused and just too many fish have been taken out. Now, our problem, now that we're a state and we have control of this resource, is to bring the fish pack up to perhaps 4 million cases and keep it constant over the year. But that is a big if.
That is by controlling the way that the fishermen handle it.
Well, we have to make sure that enough fish escape in the spawning grounds to produce the fish of 3 and 4 years into the future. And also, we have vast stores of water and tremendous potential for hydroelectric development. Now, I think in the future, the key to developing all of our minerals, we have every mineral in the world except one. The key is going to be cheap power to process the minerals here in Alaska, at least in a semi-finished product, and then send it out to the other states or perhaps even to Japan, who is one of our closest potential markets.
That is, if the cheap power were available, it would be worthwhile companies to come here and invest in mineral activities.
Well, I think it's been the history of your hydroelectric dams and your cheap power that as the dams were created and the cheap power became available, well, the industries came right into the area, and with the industry you have your payrolls and your people, and it just mushrooms up.
Joe, looking into your editor's crystal ball, do you see any other possibilities for development of Alaska's future?
Yes, John, I think I do. I think tourism is the the most immediate potential that we can begin developing right now, because Alaska has any number of glaciers and mountains to climb and ski areas, bountiful fishing, anything that a tourist, a vacationist could want, and we have. And what we have to do is to get out on the tourist market and tell the people what we have to offer, and at the same time we have to get in and build facilities for them. I think this can be our number one revenue producer, actually.
Well, then, as you see it, if I interpret your thought correctly, if one or all of these big ifs come true, Alaska's financial problems, which look pretty large at the moment, won't seem quite so big. Is that right?
That's essentially correct, and I think as far as the Alaskans themselves are concerned, we're perhaps pretty much like the states down below 100 years ago. We're pioneers, and we're not looking to the past, and we're not overawed by the future.
One of the difficulties Alaska experiences as a state is lack of communications. Anchorage enjoys a distinction quite unique. It has a railroad line in which passengers can go in two directions, toward Fairbanks at one terminal or toward Seward in the other direction. In fact, these passengers are traveling on the only railroad line in all Alaska, if you don't count the few Alaskan miles of railroad leading from Skagway into Canada. The railroad goes up the Matanuska Valley on the way to Fairbanks, and if a passenger wants to drop off somewhere in the wilds for a few days camping, the railroad obligingly deposits him and picks him up at any time and place agreed upon in advance. Since the railroad connects the two major population centers of the state, it does a good business, and the scenery is often of breathtaking beauty and grandeur. The population of the new state is a young one. The average age of married couples is much younger than is the case in the older communities in the lower 48 states. They have a lot of children. Many of these youngsters were born in Alaska, a distinction which, until recently, was quite extraordinary, seldom met, since only a generation ago the total population of Alaska was so tiny. In summer, the lakes provide plenty of recreation, and the children are healthy. Mr. John Manders, lawyer of Anchorage, is one of the older citizens, and I wanted to hear his opinions on Alaskan statehood.
The question in Alaska today is not that we don't believe we should have statehood or that it's an accomplished fact now, but it's more the fact, can they support it? It's an economic issue, and it was when the statehood talks were going on, when the bills were before the Congress. Frankly, I think if statehood is to succeed in Alaska, they're going to have to cut down a public payroll, and we can't have all these things that the federal government is apparently handing out to every state in the Union.
Are they going to raise taxes?
They'll have to raise taxes. The state right now is going on small income, but they're also using transitional funds.
And then when these federal funds are finished, you're going to have to pay the bill.
That is the time that you're going to pay the fiddler, whether you like it or not, or the dance is going to stop.
Well, how many people are there to pay that bill?
Well, figure about 25% of the people in Alaska are taxpayers of 225,000, which approximately is 60,000
So there are
taxpayers.
60,000 taxpayers. 60,000 civilians or?
Civilians and corporations.
And do you think they can support this territory or this state?
I don't think so. I never did.
Brad Phillips, your fellow Alaskans speak of you as one of Alaska's outstanding younger businessmen, as a tourist agency owner, a hotel owner, and various other things. What do you think about Alaska's statehood?
Well, John, I think that statehood certainly has been a necessary thing. I was enthusiastic about it when they first started talking about it, since I have been in Alaska. And I think it's a a thing that we had to do sooner or later, and I'm very pleased that we did it sooner. It certainly is going to have its problems, and it's our job to recognize the problems and try to do something about it.
But aren't you going to run into some awfully big bills pretty soon?
Oh, there's no question about it. I feel very much like I did when I got married. I'm sure that I would run into quite a few bills. But again, it's our responsibility to get qualified people that live in Alaska, and we have a lot of them, to go to the legislature and to take an active interest in the economic development of this country. We have a tax base which isn't like you'll find in many other places where they have a lot of industry, but we have to develop this industry, and we have to use our taxes wisely. We have also been fortunate to have the other 48 states contribute through the federal government some transitional funds that we will use for about 4 years. If these are used wisely and we plan now, I think we'll make the transition all right.
Well, Brad, where are you going to get your money? You don't have too many taxpayers.
Well, that's very true. And certainly some of our money will come from the oil revenues, which we're fortunate enough to have now. I spent this afternoon 2 hours with some people talking about power development and what it will mean to the, again, the economic and industrial development of Alaska, because we have transportation, we have willing people, and we have certainly a lot of natural resources that have not been developed, and I'm sure that with proper power, proper labor market, proper transportation, that this will come to pass in a reasonable near future.
Well, these are pretty big ifs. How are you going to attract capital to develop them?
Well, certainly attitude is one thing, and the responsible actions of, again, our state legislature and our local governing bodies will be things that will indicate to the people of the United States that we are not only willing but able to manage our own affairs. I think the working hand in hand with the federal government, the idea of developing our hydroelectric potential here will also help attract industry, particularly with the rather question mark view that we see on national defense and the attitude of the federal government in dispersing industry to areas except those that are very vulnerable now.
Is anyone in the state government going out and looking for new investment possibilities, trying to attract new business? After all, you're pretty dependent on one thing, the federal government.
Well, that certainly this is the case, and I'm sure the last legislature made the initial step when they appropriated $160,000 for a survey and for someone to take a cold, hard look at this. I think this is going to be the primary job of the next legislature, which will meet in January, and I think if we do nothing else, we have to do this.
Brad, I'd like to ask you one final question. We haven't much time, but what's your opinion of Alaska's future?
Well, I tell you, I can demonstrate my idea about Alaska's future very much by telling you that my family is here and everything that I ever expect to own is invested in Alaska. My total time and effort is right here in Alaska, and I find that most of the people I associate feel the same way. And if I didn't believe this, I would be working on an 8-to-5 job, saving my money to get out of here someday, and I'm not.
Juneau is built onto a mountainside, and the governor's mansion has breathtaking views over the water. But you have to climb pretty high to reach it, a hill that's rough on the governor's car. The capital was founded, like many Alaska towns, by a gold strike in 1880. Joe Juneau hit it rich, lost it, and disappeared somewhere in the Klondike, but the town continued. The capital moved to Juneau from Sitka in 1900. Almost everyone in Juneau is connected with state or federal government. The building that houses the state capitol is a busy place. Naturally, I felt Governor William Egan, a Democrat, Alaska born and bred, was the man who could tell me most about the 49th state and what being a state implied for the big land. The governor's news aide, Frank Vail, arranged the appointment, and the governor greeted me warmly when I met him and told him of the questions that had arisen during my Alaska visit.
Governor, Alaskans have been trying to get statehood ever since Judge Wickersham, one of your first representatives to Washington, began proposing it in 1916. Why this impelling urge for statehood on the part of Alaskans?
Well, Mr. McVeigh, one, because Alaskans have always been subjected to federal taxation. Uncle Sam has never lavishly gone out of his way in the expenditure of federal funds in Alaska, despite the fact that Alaskans paid exactly the same percentage of their income to the federal government in many ways that all the citizens of other states in the Union did. Secondly, there is just a natural inherent feeling in the hearts of all Americans that in order to be first-class Americans, they had to have the right to vote for President and Vice President of the United States. They felt that they should have voting representation in the United States Congress, in the Senate of the United States. Those are things we did not have while we were in territorial status. And just as important as these reasons, of course, is the fact that the territory of Alaska was forced to function under the most highly restrictive organic act that had ever been formulated for any of the territories of the American that existed under the United States jurisdiction. We, for example, did not have control of any of our resources. We had no say whatsoever in determining the way that our resources would be developed. We were denied the right to have a court system of our own. We were subjected totally in the courts to federal jurisdiction, and there were many, many other good reasons for the great desire of the vast majority of Alaskans to achieve full citizenship with each of the rest of the citizens of the United States as sovereign as a sovereign entity of the American Union.
Well, Governor, I've recently done a lot of traveling around your state, and I've talked with many Alaskans. And some questions have arisen. I put down some of these questions in my little notebook, and I think I may refer to them to be sure that you know what has come to my mind in talking with Alaskans and seeing the situation of Alaska today. One was, since Alaska is now a state, and there's really no turning back, do you still feel that the federal government should go on supporting you as it has in the past?
Mr. McVeigh, I think that I partially answered that question in the first statement that I made. I know that there is a general belief throughout the United States that Uncle Sam had been Alaska's great benefactor, that huge sums of money had been lavishly expended in Alaska. And I think that going over this new great state, that you yourself can see that if such sums of money were expended here, they're not very, it's pretty hard to find where they were expended. The fact is that Alaskans have always paid identically the same taxes that you, as a citizen of any specific state of the Union, have been subjected to in your lifetime. That we have willingly done so as we did so even as second-class American citizens, and that it was our feeling that Uncle Sam was not doing what he should have done, and that he would have accomplished here in this area in conjunction with the efforts of a state government. That is one of the chief reasons that we desired statehood, because other than the expenditures for defense installations, the federal government had not participated with us as they should have participated. At least that is my feeling, and it is the feeling of many, many thousands of Alaskans, and has been the feeling of any number of Alaskans over the past few decades. But at the present time, Alaska, the organization of the state government, has gone along real well, we feel, and there are a number of instances where, with our voting representation in the United States Senate and in the United States Congress, we have achieved already in the Congress of the United States in statehood status the amendments to particular congressional enactments that will help us as we go along in the transitional period. But I would say again that I would like to dispel this notion that Uncle Sam has just been the great benefactor money-wise insofar as Alaska is concerned.
Well, what about the people of Alaska? I hear some people say that those who come to Alaska are the misfits and the failures, and they're coming here to escape problems at home. Are these the kind of people who can build a self-reliant Alaska?
Well, now, I don't agree with those Alaskans who say that, Mr. McVeigh. As a matter of fact, I very vehemently disagree. The vast majority of our citizens are people who have immigrated here from all the 48 states of the Union, and the great number of them have come willing to work, willing to build, and have been wonderful assets. People, of course, are the greatest assets that any state or territory ever has, and the great state of Alaska is very fortunate in having, in its vast majority of numbers of people who look to the future with optimism, who feel that we are on the ground floor of a great effort that will mean something that will be very beneficial not only to Alaska but to all the rest of the states of the American Union.
Another question, do Alaskans really want this state to grow? We visitors sometimes get the impression, as I've noted here, that they'd prefer not to have too many people come here, that they like the present way of life.
Well, now, I think that you can find a minority of people in any state of the American Union who will come to you as you talk to them, meet them on the street, and say that, oh, I wish that this hadn't happened. I wish that this big building hadn't been constructed and that all these people didn't work here, and I wish that this mill wasn't working over down the street there, because before that mill was in operation, everything was really wonderful, and they speak of the old times, and they speak of things of the past, and that's only natural. I think that particularly as people get older, they like to reminisce about the good old days, but down in their hearts, I think that above it all, despite what they say, that even that minority of people who often give you the feeling that they're thinking that way, that they don't think that way, and that they're mighty proud when they see progress being made. But I would say that 90% of the people in Alaska are willing to dig right in with both feet, so to speak, and make this state one of the greatest.
Well, that's what Governor Egan and some other Alaskans think about the statehood problems. To an outsider who has seen most of the state, its territory is so vast, so much of it is barren, its people so few, that adequate development of Alaska seems incredible optimism. If some things happen, Alaska may be able to function as an integrated state. But the ifs are big, and if these things don't come about, Alaska seems likely to run into real trouble. Anyone who knows the people of this state well hopes for their success. But realistically, it is hard to accept their beliefs.
This is National Educational Television.